Hi everyone. In this video, we are going to discuss about the concept of availability set, and we will try to understand with the help of availability set how can we ensure the high availability of our resources and data inside the data center.
If you want to go through the complete course, you can access it through our website. Link of website is given in the description. Now let's come back to the topic.
In our previous video, we had discussed about the concept of availability zone. With the help of availability zone, we can provide protection for our resources and data against data center level failure. We can understand this with the help of example of virtual machine and storage account. Let's say if we have created an storage account to store our data in cloud, and while creating this storage account, we have selected ZRS as a redundancy option. So in this case, if I store any data inside this storage account, that data is going to replicate inside all three availability zone. Let's assume while creating this storage account, I have selected Central India as a region. Central India has three availability zone, and when I'm creating this storage account with ZRS option, all of the data is going to be replicated inside data centers of these three different availability zones here. In case if this availability zone is down because of power, network and cooling failure, data centers those are located inside this availability zone will not be accessible anymore. But in this case also, we can access our data from data centers of other availability zone because all of my data is getting replicated here. So through this example, we can understand availability zone is providing protection against data center level failure. We can also understand it with the example of virtual machine. Let's clean this diagram first of all. Let's say I have created three virtual machine. So this virtual machine is WS01, and inside this virtual machine we have deployed our web application, that is abc.com. This virtual machine is created inside this data center which is part of availability zone 1. Similarly, I have created two more virtual machine. Let's say I'm deploying this virtual machine in availability zone 2. It means this virtual machine is going to be deployed inside one of the data center which is part of availability zone 2. Let's say name of this virtual machine is WS02, and inside this virtual machine also I have deployed my web application, that is abc.com. Similarly, I have created one more virtual machine which is part of availability zone 3, and when I select availability zone 3 of Central India region, so this virtual machine is going to be deployed inside one of the data center of this availability zone. Let's say name of this virtual machine is WS03, and inside this virtual machine also I have deployed my web application. Now I want to create a load balancer. So let's say this is my load balancer, and all of these virtual machines are connected to this load balancer as a target, so that if any connection hit on this load balancer, get evenly distributed among all these three virtual machines. So this is my load balancer. Let's assume with this load balancer we have assigned a public IP address. It means we can access this load balancer with the help of internet. So through internet this public IP address is accessible. Let's assume this is our one of the user, and from his laptop browser he is typing abc.com. It means in that case it will hit on this public IP address of load balancer, and based on configured algorithm this load balancer is going to decide where exactly this incoming connection should be connected in the backend. So out of these three virtual machine, load balancer will forward this incoming connection to one of the virtual machine here. Let's say if because of power, network or cooling failure, this availability zone is down. If availability zone is down, it means data center is also down. And if data center is down, our virtual machine will not be accessible anymore. In that case, this particular load balancer is going to consider this virtual machine as unhealthy, and going forward, if any incoming connection hit on this public IP address, load balancer will forward that incoming connection to remaining these two virtual machines. Those are placed inside two different data centers, and those are part of two different availability zone. So through this example also we can understand availability zone is providing data and resource protection against data center level failure. Now if we want to ensure high availability of our resources inside data center through protection against power, network and hardware failure. In that case, availability set comes into the picture. So now let's focus on what is availability set and how it ensures the high availability of our resources inside data center. To understand this concept, I'm going to draw one diagram here. So let's say this is my central India region, and inside this central India region, this is my one of the availability zone. Let's assume this is availability zone 1. As we know, inside availability zone, there can be one or more than one data center. So this one is one of the data center which is part of availability zone 1. So this is my data center here. Inside this data center, we have a lot of physical racks, and inside these physical racks only, we mount our physical server. So this one is a rack here. And inside this rack, we have mounted our physical server. So this one is physical server. And whenever we create any virtual machine, actually that virtual machine is going to be created inside this physical server only. So this is my virtual machine here. Now let's assume there is a hardware issue with this physical server and which finally caused breakdown of this physical server here. So in this case, this virtual machine will also not be available. Other than this, it also might be possible that there is an issue with this particular rack here and that is not working as expected, and because of that, all of the physical servers, those were mounted with this physical rack here, are down. And if all of the physical servers, those are mounted inside this racks, are down, in this case, this virtual machine will also not work. As we know that Microsoft Azure conduct maintenance on time-to-time basis, and during this maintenance, sometime Microsoft Azure has to reboot their physical servers as well. And if physical server is rebooting, in that case also virtual machine will not be accessible. And all these scenarios which I am highlighting here is happening inside the data center. And if I want protection for my resources and data against all of these failures and maintenance activities, we can take the help of availability set. Now we are going to focus on the fact how availability set is going to provide us protection against hardware failure, power failure, network failure, and maintenance activities inside a data center. Now we are focusing on the architecture of availability set, and to understand this concept, I'm going to draw one diagram here. So let's say this is one of my region and name of this region is Central India. Inside Central India region, this is one of the availability zone, and let's assume this is availability zone 1 here. As we know that availability zone can have one or more than one data center, and this is one of the data center located inside this availability zone. So this is a data center here. So let's label this as well. And inside this data center, many of physical racks are connected. So I'm going to draw few racks here. Let's say this is rack 1, this is rack 2, and this one is rack 3. And inside these racks only, we mount our physical devices. Now let's assume I'm creating an availability set, and whenever I create any availability set, this availability set is going to deployed inside a data center only. And also we can mention a name for this availability set as well. For example, name of this availability set is AS1, and whenever we create any availability set, first of all it will ask me about the fault domain. Let's say I am telling here, go ahead and configure 3 fault domains for this availability set. Now what is the meaning of fault domain? Let's try to understand. We can relate fault domain with this rack here where we have mounted our physical resources, and Microsoft Azure has assured that each physical rack should have separate power and network connectivity. So this is my rack 1. It has separate power and a separate network switch. Similarly, if I speak about rack number 2, for this rack also, Microsoft Azure has assured that it has separate power and network. And similarly for rack 3, Microsoft Azure has given separate power and network connection. Cooling will remain the same because all of these racks are part of the same data center here. Now the question is, why we are considering this as a fault domain? So generally, whenever any power and network failure occurs, it only impacts this rack 1 because Microsoft Azure has given separate power and network connectivity to rack number 2. So the impact of rack 1 is not going to impact this second rack here. That is the reason we call it as a fault domain. It means whatever fault occurs inside this fault domain, is not going to impact other domain here. So let's say this is my fault domain 1. So let me label it also here. So this one is fault domain 1, and in actual counting start from 0, so I will mention here 0. So this one is fault domain 0. Similarly, this is my second fault domain, and this is my third fault domain, and I'm going to label it accordingly. So this is fault domain 1, and this one is fault domain 2. So total 3 fault domain we have, and that's the reason when I created this availability set, I had mentioned I need 3 fault domain inside this availability set. Whenever I create any availability set, I can configure maximum 3 fault domain inside a single availability set. So now through this diagram, we can understand Microsoft Azure has provided some sort of mechanism which provide protection against power and network failure inside a data center. Now we will focus on update domain, and with the help of update domain, we can protect our resources against downtime caused by Microsoft maintenance activities. Now the next question is, what is update domain? Update domain is a logical grouping of physical resources. To understand this concept, I'm drawing one diagram here inside my availability set. So let's say this is my update domain here. As we know that inside our rack, we mount our physical servers. Let's say these are few of the servers. Those are mounted inside this rack 1, which is part of this fault domain 0. Similarly, in second rack also, we have some physical servers. Those are mounted here inside this rack. And in similar manner, we have few physical servers. Those are mounted inside this rack number 3. Now through this diagram, you can understand this update domain has logically grouped all of these physical servers, and all of these physical servers are spread across in different fault domain. Similarly, let's say we have this second update domain here, and with the help of this update domain also, we have grouped our physical servers. Those are mounted inside our rack. So let's say these are few servers. Those are mounted inside rack 1. Similarly, in rack 2 also we have some mounted server, and in rack 3 as well we have few mounted physical server here. And with the help of this update domain, we have grouped together all of the physical server inside this update domain. Now the question is how this update domain is going to help us here to protect against downtime caused by Microsoft Azure maintenance activity. Microsoft Azure, whenever conduct any maintenance activity and Microsoft has to reboot servers as part of this maintenance activity, in that case, Microsoft assured that at a time they are going to reboot servers. Those are part of the one update domain. If we try to understand this concept with the help of this diagram, let's say Microsoft is conducting some maintenance activity, and as part of this maintenance activity, Microsoft has to reboot their servers. So Microsoft will only reboot servers. Those are part of this update domain. Once this update domain is completely up, after 30 minutes later only, Microsoft will start maintenance activity in this second update domain. So the benefit is that Microsoft is not going to reboot all of the servers one shot inside a single availability set. Now as a customer, how it is going to help me? Let's understand with the help of an example here. Let's say I have 3 virtual machines. So this is WS01, this is WS02, and this one is WS03. Inside these virtual machine, I have deployed my web application, that is abc.com, and this identical web application is deployed in all of these 3 virtual machine here. After this, we have created a load balancer, and all of these virtual machines are connected as a target to this load balancer here. On this load balancer, we have assigned our public IP address so that our customer can access our website from the internet. So let's say this is my customer who is connected through the internet, and via internet he can hit on this public IP address of my load balancer while accessing my web application abc.com, and load balancer will forward this connection to one of the virtual machine. Those are connected as a target to this load balancer here. Let's say I want to deploy part of the setup with the help of availability set. So basically I want to deploy these 3 virtual machine inside my availability set named as AS1. So I'll come back to my diagram again, and in this diagram I am creating a availability set, and name of this availability set is AS1. While creating this availability set, I have mentioned I need 3 fault domains, and let's say I am looking for 3 update domain also. Inside a single availability set, we can create maximum 20 update domain, but as of now, for this availability set, we have mentioned 3 update domain here. So let's say this is my update domain 1. Let me label this also. So this one is my update domain 1, and in real counting start from 0, so I will mention 0 here. Similarly, this is my second update domain. So I will label it as update domain 1, and I have to draw a third update domain here. So let's say this is my third update domain. Let's label this as well. So this one is my third update domain, and I will mention it as a update domain 2. Let me clean all of these physical servers from here. And now I want to deploy these 3 virtual machines inside my availability set so that we can provide protection within data center. So we have 3 virtual machines, and I'm going to deploy these 3 virtual machines inside this availability set. Let's say the first virtual machine I'm going to deploy inside fault domain 0 and update domain 0. It means there will be a physical server here which will be part of fault domain 0 and update domain 0, and inside that physical server my virtual machine is going to be deployed here. So let's assume this is my virtual machine, and name of this virtual machine is WS01. Now I want to deploy my second virtual machine, and this virtual machine I'm going to deploy in a physical server which is part of fault domain 1 and update domain 1. So let's say this is my second virtual machine, and name of this virtual machine is WS02, and this virtual machine is deployed inside a physical server which is part of fault domain 1 and update domain 1. Similarly, now I want to deploy my third virtual machine, and I'm deploying this virtual machine inside a physical server which is part of fault domain 2 and update domain 2, and name of this virtual machine is WS03. So we have successfully deployed our virtual machine in different fault domain and update domain combination. Let's say now Microsoft Azure is doing its regular maintenance, and during maintenance Microsoft Azure has to reboot this update domain here. While Microsoft Azure will reboot update domain 0, it means all of the physical servers those are part of update domain 0 will also reboot, and if physical server is rebooting during that time, this WS01 will not be accessible. But at the same time, Microsoft Azure has promised us that they are not going to touch other 2 update domain which is part of this availability set here. Sorry, this one. And because of that, we can access our web application from WS02 and WS03. Now let's assume this maintenance is done and this virtual machine is up and running, and after 30 minutes, Microsoft Azure start maintenance in this second update domain. During this maintenance, suppose Microsoft Azure reboots our server. So in that case, WS02 will not be accessible, but same time, our customer can access our web application from WS01 and WS03. After maintenance is over, this WS02 is up and running, and after 30 minutes of this, Microsoft Azure will start maintenance on this update domain 2. And let's say during this maintenance, Microsoft Azure reboot the server, and if servers are rebooted, during that time, WS03 will not be accessible, but at the same time, our customer can access our application from WS01 and WS02. So through this architecture, you can easily understand how availability set is going to give us protection against power failure, network failure, and as well as protection against a downtime during maintenance activity. Let's go through some of the important points related to availability set. Each availability set can be configured with up to 3 fault domains and 20 update domains. So whenever we create any availability set, we can take maximum 3 fault domain and 20 update domain. Update domain indicate group of virtual machine and underlying physical hardware that can be rebooted at the same time. So update domain is like a logical grouping of underlying physical hardware and virtual machine. The order of update domains being rebooted may not proceed sequentially during planned maintenance, but only one update domain is rebooted at a time. So whenever Microsoft Azure is doing the maintenance and rebooting the server, it is not mandatory that it will happen in the sequence. Microsoft Azure can follow any sequence of update domain for the maintenance activity inside the availability set, but only one update domain is going to be rebooted at a time inside a single availability set. A rebooted update domain is given 30 minutes to recover before maintenance is initiated on a different update domain. It means during the maintenance when reboot happen, after reboot 30 minutes are given to virtual machine to recover, and after this 30-minute slot only Microsoft will initiate maintenance in different update domain. Fault domain define the group of virtual machine that share a common power source and network switch. So as we discussed, fault domain has separate power source and network switch, and because of that reason only it acts as a separate domain in term of fault tolerance. So this is how availability set architecture is designed, and it helps us to protect our resources and data against failure inside the data center. I hope this concept is clear now. See you in next video. Thank you.